Before you start this job, you need to go to a shop to have the R134 removed from the system so that it does not escape into the atmosphere. You have to have this done by a professional. Have that removed, and then you can proceed to this job. I'm going to remove this nut. Use a 21mm socket. Remove these two nuts. Use a 15mm socket. Grab this cover here, pull up, and then pull out. It's just clipped in. Pull these clips off. We want to take this trim off. You can just use something to push down on that, like a small screwdriver. Slide those out. Or a trim tool. When you get those all out, just grab this cover and slide it right off. Use an 18mm socket, take this bolt out. Now underneath the car, we're going to take a floor jack and a block of wood. We're going to lift up on the oil pan. Just raise up the engine. To be able to move the radiator slightly, I'm going to take these two brackets out. Use a 10mm socket. Take these 4 bolts out. There's 2 on this side, 2 on the other side. Use a 10mm socket. And do the same for the other side. Take these 2 out, use the same 10mm socket. Take this cover off here, there's a lock on both sides there, just push down on those, slide it off. Now we can access this bolt right here. Use a 15mm socket, take this bolt out, be careful of the fuse box. Slide that bolt out, there's another one right next to it. Take this hose off right here, just push on the two tabs. Should be able to slide it off just like that. And we're going to loosen up this worm clamp. Use a straight blade screwdriver and slide this off. Disconnect the connector. Push down with the tab, slide it off. There's some tabs underneath here. You just got to push down on those. Should be another one over here. And you should be able to grab this. Just slide it up. And out of the way. Now take these 2 bolts off, use a 15mm socket. Be careful of the computer. We're going to take this shield off. There's push pins all around. Just use a trim tool. Take the push pins off. There should be some there, some there. Over here, there's a couple. Take those off. And all along the sides and the front. Grab the shield and slide it down. There's 2 bolts that connect to this bracket that goes up to the top of the vehicle. Use a 10mm socket, take those 2 bolts out. There's 2 bolts on the side, one here, one on the other side. Use a 10mm socket, take these out. gives you a little more room. Take these push pins off, use a trim tool. Pull those out. There's a connector right here for the front lower lights. Disconnect that right there. Make sure none of the wires are connected. That's good. There's a connector over here. Disconnect this connector. Slide that off. That's good. And same on the other side. Take these push pins off in the wheel wells. Just use a trim tool. And behind here, there's a 10mm bolt. Use a 10mm socket. Take that bolt out, just like that. Further in, there's a 10mm nut. Loosen that up. With that nut loosened, you may have to push the stud up a little bit, and then it should just slide forward and pop down. It looks like this. It's just slotted right there. And then you want to do the same on the other side. And you can grab the bumper and just slide it off. Disconnect the connector right here. And then we want to separate the connector from this panel. Just use a trim tool. Just try to pop this out without breaking the connector. There we go. And then there's 2 bolts on top. Take those 2 bolts out. Use a 10mm socket. There's a couple push pins holding this on. Just take those push pins out. Just use the trim tool. Same on this side. Right there. And then this whole panel should slide right out. There's a clip right here. Just pop that trim clip off. Using a trim tool. If there's any others, that's good. Same on this side. Slide that out of the way. Take a 13mm socket in here. There's 4 bolts on each side. Take those bolts out. And that slides right out. Now there's some wires that are attached right there and there. Just use a trim tool, take those off. You can disconnect the connector right here. Push down on the tab, slide that out. You can grab this piece. I'm gonna slide it out. Be careful of the condenser. Just like that. And this whole thing slides up and out of the way. Then just grab a pry bar under here. Slide that up and slide it out. We can take these panels off. Just use a trim tool and take the push pins out. Pop those out. Sometimes if you use 2, it helps out. Pop those out. Just set that aside. There's one on the other side, do the same. This lower radiator hose, we want to disconnect that from the radiator. There's a clamp down there. It's a little bit tricky to get to. We're going to use a hose clamp tool. Make sure you have a drain bucket underneath because you're going to lose some coolant. You can pull the radiator up a little bit and just try to move it so it's in the right spot for you. If you're struggling to get that clamp off, try to get the clamp off right here. You're just not going to be able to get as much coolant out of the radiator when draining it. And just make sure you put the drain bucket underneath there. And just use some hose clamp tools. Slide that off. try to give it a twist back and forth. You might have to use a right angle pick. Just get underneath there, loosen it up. And then you can twist it. Slide it off. And let that coolant drain. Now we'll take the upper radiator hose off. Just use a hose clamp tool. Squeeze the hose clamp. And just twist it. Just try to slide it off. And slide that off, and we can slide that out of the way. Disconnect the connector on the coolant fan. Just a little button, just push down on the button. Slide that off. Then there's a retainer holding the wires on. We're going to pop that retainer off just using a trim tool. And then there's another one on this side. Disconnect that one. Slide it off and then pop off the retainer. Slide those out of the way. We're going to remove this hold down bolt for the transmission cooler. Use a 10mm socket. There's one bolt up here. And there's another one further down. It's kind of hard to see, attached to the other line. So take that bolt out as well. All right, got that one out. And we're going to pop this cooler line off. Just pop the cover off. Use just a flat blade tool. And then you can take this clip off using a pick. They do make a special tool for this if you have it. You can just slide this off. Slide it out. And then you're going to have some fluid come out. Try not to let it drip into the pan of coolant. You don't want those mixing. So get another pan. Slide that off and out of the way. Then you can do the same with the other one. It's kind of hard to see the other one. Or just slide it out of the way for now. On the top part of the fans, there's two bolts. Use a 10mm socket. Take those bolts out. And same with the other side. There's a clip right here. Just use a trim tool. Just pop this clip off. The same clip that's on top, there's one on the bottom. Just use a small screwdriver. Just feel down around for it. And you're just gonna pry it off. All right, that just popped off. You might have to twist it to the side a little bit. And it slides right out. Now slide the fan down in position. Slide the lower feet in first into the radiator. And then push it down. It's lined up. And put the bolts in. Get those both started and tighten this down. And the other one. You take this clip, line this up, push it on, and then with the other clip, you can do the same underneath. It's a little bit tricky to get to. And put the upper transmission line in. Press it on to the clip, clips down, and then put the cover over, lock it down. Now I'll put the bolt in for the bracket for the cooler line. Get that started, and then tighten it down. And then we'll do the same on the bottom one. plug in the coolant fans and then push down on the retainers. Get those locked in. Same with this one. Lock it in and then push on the retainer. Now, reattach this coolant hose. Line it up. Get that in position. The hose should line up properly and loosen up on the clamp. And the upper radiator hose, do the same, line it up. Slide it on. And loosen up on the clamp. Slide these side panels in place. Line these up with the push pins. And do this on both sides. Now slide this cross member back in place. Slide it down. You want it as close to where it was as possible. That looks good. Put the bolts back in. Get those all started. Tighten those down. Now slide this bracket in place up top. It slides underneath. Make sure that lines up. We're going to put the bolts in up top. Get those started. And also the bolts underneath. And tighten those down. And these wires can be resecured to the bracket right there and right there. Now slide this aluminum bumper in place. There and right here. And take the bolts, get those all started. Now we can slide this panel in position. It's going to line up right there and right there. Get the bolts started. And tighten those down. Connect the wires right here. Line that up. Slide that in position. And then connect this to the ambient air temp sensor. Lock it in place. These bolts can go back in on the side. Tighten those down. Put these brackets on over the radiator and put the bolts in and tighten those down. Push these push pins back in. There on the other side. Just like that. Now we can connect the bumper. Get it lined up. Push the sides in. You're going to go in the slot and then push it back. Slide that in place Then take the bolt, line it up, get it started. And tighten it down. And then you have to tighten up that nut that's in there. Just snug that up. Should be good. Now I'll put the push pins in. Snug those down. And do the same on the other side. I'm going to plug this connector in, lock it down, and then slide it onto the mount. Just like that. Plug the connector in for the fog lights on both sides. Now I'll slide this front lower shield underneath. And put the push pins back in, line those up. And lock them down. Should be one there, there, over here. In the front. And over on the sides as well. Get all those push pins in. Put the lower engine mount nut on. Then these two nuts go right here for the bracket. Get those started. And tighten the nuts down. Now push these push pins back in. Lock them down. And those three. And put the fuse box panel back in place. Take the bolt for the top engine mount. Line that up. And tighten it down. And take the airbox. Line it up. Get this part in first. And tip it down. Get the latches, lock those on. Get the snorkel on. Tighten that down. Plug the connector in. Lock it down. Then put this shield on after you put the airbox on. And put the engine cover on. Line it up. And press it down in place. Now you want to take the coolant reservoir cap off, add the appropriate coolant. You want to fill it all the way to the top. Then you want to run the engine for about 10 minutes, make sure it gets nice and hot, shut it down, and then adjust the coolant level accordingly. After you're done the job, you want to go back to the place that you had the refrigerant removed, the R134A, and have them refill the system.